You can't eat, you can't think, you can't speak, you can't do anything. And she just keeps walking away. And her mom says, "Wait, at least let me get you some food." So she gave her a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. And she pretends like she's going to school. She zigs where she should have zagged and gets to the sea. At the first sight of the sea, I felt a certain relief. I hadn't the slightest idea or expectation of what would happen there. I only knew I had to be there, be where I knew I belonged. So she walks toward the waves, takes off her shoes and socks. Because of its warmth, I could wiggle my toes and move my ankles without pain. She finds the water surprisingly warm. So I scooted down even more. The next wave swirled clear around me, and since my clothes were now wet, I got up and walked into the water. As I waded in, any part of me immersed in the warm water was immediately freed of pain. So I kept going, walking into the sea, clothes and all. When the water was up to my chest, seeing a wave coming, instead of jumping over it, I decided to go under. The instant my head went under, my mind cleared, defrosted, or returned, and everything in me cried out, "I'm myself. I'm myself again." The surprise, the joy, and jubilation was overwhelming. It was an unrepeatable experience that would forever be etched in the depths of my being. My beloved sea had done this for me. Its inscrutable, magnetic mystery had been there for me. I never doubted God had worked this miracle. Not the God I didn't know or the one I had prayed to. No, it was God whose mystery is the sea, or sea whose mystery is God. This is the God who worked the miracle for me. So she collapses and ends up spending the vast majority of the day sleeping on the beach in her wet school uniform. When I awoke, I could tell by the position of the sun it was late afternoon. And she's curious, will she still have this hip pain? With no expectation, I got up and put my full weight on both legs and carefully stepped out. For the first few steps, I felt nothing, no pain. But as I walked down the beach, it was obvious the pain was still there, only instead of the usual 11 on a scale of 10, the pain was only a 3 or 4, which, comparatively speaking, was easy to live with. After I had started walking, however, I noticed something else. I felt taller and was sure I had grown several inches. I decided the first thing I'd do when I got home was look in the mirror and check this out. She felt rather transformed emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically. On the way home, I became aware that not only in height, but in other ways I was somehow different. I had changed, yet I couldn't put my finger on how. Although I had returned to myself, yet it was not the same self. For one thing, I felt new, or as if my life was starting new from this point on. I also felt invulnerable, as if nothing could ever get me down again. I had a strong sense of self-sufficiency and independence, and that to the very depths of myself, a depth where no one could ever touch me. I was my own master. Also, it seemed as if the past was dead. All I'd been through the last months were gone, wiped out. None of it mattered anymore. There would be no continuation of the past because everything now was new. It was the beginning of a whole new life. Though I had never lacked any sense of self, yet by comparison, this new self was huge, strong, with a certain sense of dignity and uprightness never experienced before. It was as if instead of running from challenges, from people, situations, or whatever, from now on I'd be waiting for them, not out of defiance, but as a test to this new self. Though I did not think of it at the time, with the emergence of this new self, my childhood was over, finished. I couldn't go back. The one who walked into the sea was no more, and the one who emerged was a new person. I think somehow this is kind of a foreshadowing of the no ego event. I'm convinced that had my friend disappeared any time earlier in life, I would not have gone to pieces. I would have wondered about it, but never collapsed. It was the timing that was so cruel and inexplicable. When, at the lowest point in my life, I turned to it for help, that it chose that minute and scenario to dump me, knowing full well what a blow this would be, was unforgivable, never understandable. If this was God's doing, he made a big mistake. And she does claim later that God kind of overstepped its bounds in doing that and pushing her that far. So then they go finally to an expert in bones, and the doctor explains to her after looking at the X-rays and her parents, it's called Paget's disease, not unknown in children her age. Then he put down the X-rays, turned and looked squarely at my parents. What I don't understand is why you waited so long in coming. Her case is far advanced. Didn't she ever complain of pain? Perhaps my parents were too shocked to answer. They didn't say a word. So he turned to me and asked, "You've had a lot of pain, haven't you?" I didn't answer either, though I did nod my head. It had just dawned on me that I had never once complained of pain. Had I done so, I'd either have been taken back to the hated doctor or sent to bed, and besides, they didn't believe me anyway. No, despite the pain, I had never complained. It would only have made matters worse. So, the sisters, finding out that she has this bone disease, say she needs to go to a special school. So she goes to a school for special children and is completely horrified when the bell rings and these kids start coming out of their classrooms, walking down the hall toward her, somewhat like zombies, in her mind anyway. Twisted, deformed bodies, withered limbs, dragging feet, contorted faces. Some were hunched over, spastic, made twitching movements. Others felt their way along the wall, not a normal face or body among them. And all of this accompanied by the noisy clack and clatter of canes and metal braces, guttural sounds, and unintelligible speech. I could not have been more horrified than if it had been a vision of hell. So she's thoroughly depressed having to go to this school, absolutely hates it. I became unable to care about anything or take an interest in anything. It seemed there were no good times left for me. Later, my parents said that my despondency worried them more than my illness. So, shortly thereafter, their dad decides to take the family with some family friends in their friend's big new Cadillac on a road trip, on a pilgrimage to Mexico City to visit the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in time for May 1st for a novena to pray 9 days at the Basilica. The very idea of people praying some kind of cure or miracle for me was absolutely appalling. Perhaps if I had not known the bone would heal itself, this would not have bothered me so much. It had been bad enough to endure physical and psychological insults, but going to the shrine struck me as worse. It was a spiritual insult. There just seemed to be no end to this whole thing. She knew when she had gotten out of the water that the bone would heal itself. In the months I'd been at school, I only made one friend, a little blind boy on the bus going home. We sat together every day. He showed me the basics of reading Braille and assured me that although he could not see with his eyes, he was born blind. He saw everything in his mind and didn't miss a thing. I asked him if he saw me in his mind. He said he could if he could put his hands on my face and hair, to which I responded, "Never!" He chuckled and said, "Well, then I'll picture you the prettiest girl I know." That touched my heart. So, They